Now, back to Sunrise on News Radio 880 KCMX.
Swaying to the symphony of destruction.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. 17 minutes after the hour. Welcome to the Sunrise Show. So glad you're tuned in this morning. I wanted to bring on an expert with, aircraft care management, and they actually call it, American Airlines actually calls it CARE, Customer Assistance Relief Effort. And Ken Jenkins is with me this morning. He's a crisis and aircraft consultant, and with all the different team members, and he's been in the aircraft industry since 1982, and then American Airlines decided to, hey, we need to do more with this, and in 93 started their CARE team, Customer Assistance Relief Effort, and then it was mandated by Congress. But at some point, as a manager, serving 7 years in that capacity, and then directing over 500 CARE team members deploying and following the 9/11 attacks and Flight 587. And Ken, thank you so much for being on the program. You've been to multiple crash sites. And obviously, our hearts go out to the families left behind from Flight 9525. So, Ken, thanks for being on the program this morning.
You're welcome, and thank you, Craig.
With all that you see, and I guess there's a difference between U.S. carriers and the criteria and laws related to the flight deck and the pilot, versus what goes on in foreign countries with foreign carriers, because we also saw issues with Malaysia, the MH370 and everything like that. Explain to our listeners who are U.S. based, unless they're streaming around the world from our stream, but there are differences, right? Co-pilots, they've got to have at least two people in the cockpit at all time?
Right, and yes, there are differences. There are more similarities in most cases than there are differences. But in the United States, there is the two-person cockpit rule. So if a pilot leaves the cockpit to go to the bathroom, get something to drink, stretch their legs, then a flight attendant or a relief pilot steps in. That is not the case outside of the United States, unless it's just something that an airline happens to do. It was very interesting to see, though, with the advent of this situation with Germanwings, how quickly other airlines now across the world are saying, we're going to adopt that rule and adopt it immediately.
Yeah, almost absolutely immediately, and it should be an easy fix. One of the other criteria, and I talked to a person that has knowledge on piloting aircraft for U.S. Aircraft, is that they actually will take the food cart and block that first area with an attendant to fore and aft, so that the pilot, the flight deck is blocked. That's an additional fail-safe to help with folks possibly rushing the cockpit.
Yeah, we saw that again after 9/11, I think, with the terrorist attacks, that there were just different levels of risk reduction that you could take. One was the galley cart. Another one that may just seem like really small, but is actually quite huge, is for the airlines that have 2 or 3 classes of service, first class, a business class, and economy. There used to be curtains that they would pull to section off those areas, and some airlines removed the curtains altogether. Others still have the curtain, but it's a see-through mesh, so that passengers and other flight attendants and flight crew members can see what's going on all the way down the aisle of the aircraft.
So they can't have anybody run and do anything like that, yeah.
Exactly, where you would have that. This way it eliminates one cabin, the smaller cabin, have something horrible happen, and the rest not know what's going on, where they could jump in and help.
Exactly, and you've written a book called Resilience that's been released relatively soon. It's come out recently, but explain what goes on now with families and the crossover between airlines. I mean, the huge liability. I guess this was a protection effort to protect the families and also protect the airlines to have liability taken care of. Correct?
Well, I'm not sure how much of the liability issue came into it, and I say that there may be that aspect of it that was never approached with me or any of the other team members And what I see today with airlines and their care team members, they really keep those teams very separate from the legal and the risk management aspect. The team members come in, and we're seeing this with Germanwings and Lufthansa right now, and they have a very good, robust program, Craig. But the team members come in as somewhat like as a concierge, if you will, to provide services to the family that they may not be able to take care of themselves because they're so focused on the accident and the grieving of their loved one. So the team members will help with flying family members into the accident city, taking care of the hotel accommodations, providing access to spiritual care and child care. If they forgot medications, helping obtain those medications, things of that nature. And that allows the family then to focus on the most immediate thing that they want to, which is gaining information about what happened to their loved one, taking care of the burial of their loved one, and things of that nature.
And this is this started, of course, your experiences from American Airlines, and it's interesting that the media doesn't cover that, but this is the customer assistance relief effort or care, and you do when you're in a foreign country or anything like that, wherever this aircraft may crash, you immediately need that concierge, and I think that's a great thing that the airlines do.
Well, and I do too. A number of the carriers in the United States, American began the program in 1993, and several airlines, followed suit. And then because of the advocacy groups of families that had not been treated as well as they should have in previous accidents, they lobbied Congress to pass legislation which was signed in 1996 by President Bill Clinton at the time, called the Aviation Disaster Family Assistance Act. And that basically said for any carrier in the United States, they need to have be able to perform victim support tasks, and they list all the tasks that they have to be able to perform. And in 1997, the act was amended to provide the same requirements of any international carrier flying into and out of the United States. Now, almost 20 years later, you see similar legislation in many countries around the world, not in all, but most air carriers today follow the structure of the U.S. legislation because they have now seen it as really the right thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah, no kidding. We've got Ken Jenkins on with us. Ken, we've got a quick break to take, and then we'll come right back. He's recently just released a book called Resilience, Stories of Courage and Survival in Aviation Disasters, and we want to talk to him about what's been happening with this. Of course, the aircraft, Germanwings 9525, crashed in the Alps, and the co-pilot looks like he purposely took the aircraft down, and we want to talk about that when we come back. So we'll continue our dialogue with Ken Jenkins after this break. The Bloomberg Market Update is next. Join us right then.
So get up. Top of the morning to ya.
Now, back to Sunrise on News Radio 880 KCMX.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. 35 minutes after the hour, Craig Froelich in on the Sunrise Show. So glad you're tuning in with me and continuing our interview with Ken Jenkins. He's a aviation crisis consultant. Ben was with American Airlines back in the 80s in their care program, and he's been deployed to numerous aircraft disasters to help with family efforts and things. And it was so interesting. I was talking to Ken on the break that there is a commonality with these disasters and the families that are left coping with this. And Ken, out of this, and of course you managed a care team with American Airlines of over 500 people, and it goes back to the World Trade Centers in New York and 9/11. But Ken, your book, Resilience, Stories of Courage and Survival in Aviation Disasters, pretty interesting. I was thinking about the common amongst all of these families, and this is where this book came from, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It came from, I was first joined the program, Craig. I was a volunteer, and unfortunately we had a few accidents in the 90s, and I was assigned to work with families in the aftermath of those accidents. And then Of course, we had the events of 9/11. At that point, I was now the manager of the program. And one of the biggest commonalities was how gracious people are, even in the aftermath of such a tragedy. And specifically, the families I worked with were very accommodating and allowing the airline that had the accident, allowing us as team members to come in and provide assistance to them. And it wasn't as if we became friends or anything, but considering what had happened, for them to open the door and allow us in, and we would hug sometimes, and there were times we cried together, but they were open to the assistance that the airline could provide. And we were kind of like a conduit, if you will. They had questions, and they wanted answers, and we would take the questions that they had and funnel them to the investigators, and the investigators would provide the answers to the families. And we would take care of things like, the hotel accommodations and flying family members in to help them. We would assist with repatriation of remains and the burial service and monetary things if they needed some funds to buy clothes for a funeral or something like that. We would do our best to help them however we could. It was just a very rewarding experience overall during a tragic situation.
Well, yeah, exactly. And you wonder, all of a sudden families are faced with the monetary. I mean, it's, traveling, food, lodging, all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of where they step in. So Ken, with this recent tragic crash and this pilot, this co-pilot, this 28-year-old German citizen, Lubitz doing this, and the locking of the door, locking the pilot out, what are your comments there?
Well, the morning of the day of that they announced that the co-pilot deliberately did this, I was just sick to my stomach because there's so much anxiety, I think, associated with traveling and that whole loss of control.
Right.
And when you really step back and think about 9/11 and what happened, passengers are also very resilient today in that if they see anything that's going wrong on a plane, they're the first to jump up with the flight crew to subdue the individual that's posing the problem. But how do you do that when it's somebody in the cockpit? We have these reinforced doors to keep people out, and in this particular case, it did exactly that. It kept the pilot out. So now we go back to the drawing board, and I think that's what we're going to see in the coming months, Craig, is looking at that technology of this reinforced door and the locking mechanism, and what's a new fail-safe or override we can have where somebody on the outside with the right credentials can open the door regardless of what the person inside is doing.
Exactly. You don't have any tools. You don't have a crowbar. You don't have a hammer. You don't have an axe. You don't have anything like that. And they have that keypad, but it looks like he might have disabled that.
Well, it was armed, but they have this locking mechanism on the inside that they can keep in the locked position, which will not allow somebody from the outside in, even somebody that's supposed to be there. So I understand the safety protocol behind it, but then again, it wasn't taking into account that if you only have one person in the cockpit, that they may have some ulterior motive, besides just flying the plane safely, which then goes to say that's why you need a two-person cockpit.
Exactly, and the FAA on U.S. carriers requires that. So
exactly.
Well, Ken, we're out of time, but I want to encourage everyone to check out your website, kenjenkinsllc.com, and his just released book, Resilience, Stories of Courage and Survival in Aviation Disasters. And Ken, it's a pleasure to have you on this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig, for the time. I appreciate it.
You betcha. We'll be in touch. Okay, more on the Sunrise Show as we go. I've got Summer Christian coming up. Oh, and the Siskiyou Rollers, and they have got a big derby match coming up. The Eugene Emerald City Roller Girls Saturday over at the Meat Locker, and we've got tickets to give away. So very excited about that. We'll be talking to Summer Christian. She's the president of the Siskiyou Rollers, and if you've never been to a roller derby, well, here's your chance. So stay tuned. More on the Sunrise Show next. I'm Craig Froenig. We'll take a quick little break, and then we'll come back after this.